You're listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. I want to start off the program by saying I just got back from basically a little mini vacation with my best friend and his family. Man, it was a really awesome time. We just went out to the lake for a few days at the lake house and just got on the boat and was out on the lake all day long and ate some good food and just really hung out, man. Got away from society and, really didn't pay attention to much of anything, to be honest with you. Just a nice little getaway out in the country. So, really awesome time this past weekend. A whole lot of fun. Great way to pretty much end what's going to be the summer for me. So, because it is getting into our busy season because folks, football is just right around the corner. Speaking of football being right around the corner, it is Say What here on the Full Court Press. Say what? Now, I just got home last night and I started doing a little bit of research on what I was going to do for the Say What segment today. And I got on there and, and I thought to myself, like, what could I possibly talk about? And I thought I could talk about Daniel Cormier crying after the loss to John Bones Jones. I thought, I don't want to cover that. And part of it is because, and I know people are torn about it, and that's fine. They can have their opinion about it. Me personally, I think it's equivalent to losing a Super Bowl. You're a champion. You're defending your title. I know a lot of people think he's a paper champ with the interim championship. Be that as it may, tough loss. You get knocked out. Everybody reacts differently to different situations. It is what it is. I could have talked about a lot of things, but what I wanted to go with was Fred Gosling from the Dallas Morning News says Terrell Davis has now, quote, lowered the bar for running backs in the Hall of Fame. Say what? Now, when I read that, I thought this has got to be one of those big deals, He was on a podcast with one Peter King. I'm sure many people know who Peter King is, spent many years at ESPN. And basically, they both alluded to Terrell Davis had, quote, 3 good Hall of Fame years, was one of the best postseason running backs ever, shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Okay. Let's do some contrast and comparison. First of all, in the postseason, I think everybody knows about Terrell Davis' Super Bowl, 151 yards in that game, only played 3 quarters, suffering from migraines, had to take medication before they can get him back out on the field. Denver was ahead, had an opportunity to put the game away. As much as it's going to choke me a little bit to say this, John Elway throws an interception when Denver went for the jugular. Green Bay was able to sneak back in the game. Terrell Davis and that offensive line was the game breaker for the Denver Broncos in that Super Bowl against the Green Bay Packers. Understand, the Broncos were a 14-point underdog. At the time, it was the biggest margin ever in a Super Bowl game. And they had the smallest offensive line in the NFL. They had a 7th-round draft pick in Terrell Davis coming out of Georgia. And by the way, that Green Bay Packers defensive line featured the late, great Minister of Defense and Gilbert Brown, who was, 350 pounds? I mean, those guys were clogging up the lanes. Those 2 guys up front alone make any defense 10 times better than it is. Period. You've got the Minister of Defense and Gilbert Brown. It was a point-blank situation. Matter of fact, it was Bill Romanowski after the game that talked about how they sucked up to him. He flat out said, hey, we sucked up to him for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, we told him how great they were. I was so sick of telling him how great they were that I wanted to puke. All they did was play into the egos of the Green Bay Packers. You got to remember, Brett Favre came in, MVP, 3rd time in a row, never been done before in the NFL at the time. John Elway was nothing more than a sentimental favorite. Terrell Davis really helped propel John Elway and that football team and that offensive line. I mean, they did what needed to be done. Terrell Davis averaged 142 yards a game in his postseason career. Sure, he only had 7,000 yards during the regular season. But without Terrell Davis, we can all be honest and say, where would the Denver Broncos be? Would John Elway have a ring? He helped make the passing game even better for John Elway. How many years was the Denver Broncos a football team that relied on Elway having to do it all? Run, throw. They had him doing pooch punt plays. How many years was that football team on John Elway's back? And Terrell Davis came in, and some of that defense came in. John Mobley, Bill Romanowski, Neil Smith, Steve Atwater, a longtime Bronco veteran. Terrell Davis was mobbed by injury. That part of what they talked about is very true. Terrell Davis did play hurt, but he also had a lot of migraine issues. And that was what ultimately upended his career. He even said one time in an interview that since he doesn't play football anymore, the migraines have stopped. With all this talk about CTE and all this going on and, Roger Goodell, all the things that have recently come out about $30 million and $18 million of it being owed and all this, a guy like Terrell Davis, who played with migraines, said that he would still tell kids, yes, I think you should play football. Matter of fact, when I was young, I remember reading an interview about Terrell Davis, where he was a troubled youth, and he finally looked up one day and he said, what are you going to do with your life? Guy didn't even start playing football until he was, a freshman in high school, if I remember correctly? And look at the career that he had. And why is Terrell Davis being attacked? You got people like Corey Dillon going after him, trying to justify himself for being in the NFL Hall of Fame. One of the things that I always like to tell people is the numbers don't lie, but they don't always tell the entire story. Part of the Heisman Trophy candidacy, for instance, is the best player at that position for his team. What does he mean to his team? Without him, where would they be? And I think that's something that we have to take into consideration when we talk about Terrell Davis, who, by the way, in 1995, his first year in the NFL, ran for 1,100 yards, 1,117 to be exact, which, by the way, equals being just shy of Marcus Allen's second best season ever. Marcus Allen's second best season ever was around the 1,168 mark. His best season ever was right around the 1,700 yard mark. Terrell Davis' best season ever was 2,000 yards. Matter of fact, from year 1 to year 4, not just 3 great years, but 4, he had 1,100, over 1,500, over 1,700, and then the 2,000 yards is what I mean. 2008 yards, not 2008 season, of course. Marcus Allen played 16 years in the NFL and ran for 12,000 yards. Terrell Davis played 7 in the NFL and on 3 separate years played 8 games or less and still had 7,000 yards and averaged a half yard more a carry than Marcus Allen. And you're going to tell me that Terrell Davis shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. For real? That's what we're doing, bro. Let us please remember that the Denver Broncos, during that, 14-2, 15-1 season, 14-2, right? Sat Terrell Davis. Matter of fact, there were a lot of games where they would be blowing teams out and they would sit Terrell Davis for the last quarter. I.e. the New England Patriots. Remember? Shannon Sharp, he's getting on the phone and he's John with the fans. He goes, yes, call the president. Tell him to bring the SWAT. We are killing the New England Patriots. Yeah, come on. Terrell Davis meant everything to that team. Well, then what do? They compared him to Lynn Swann. How many times a game were people throwing the football back then? Yeah, I get it. Lynn Swann only had 2.8 catches a game, 300 in his entire career. How many times was the football being thrown back then? Think about it. There's a lot of people who would tell you that Terry Bradshaw was overrated, was carried by Franco Harris, and a really good defense. I don't know. I haven't seen enough games from that time frame to really know that. All I've seen is highlights. So I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to judge. I do know that Terry Bradshaw has 4 Super Bowl rings. I do know that Lynn Swann has rings. But rings don't necessarily define a career either. There's a lot of guys who rode the pine who never started a game in their life that have a Super Bowl ring. You could say, well, Andrew, come on. That just means they were good enough to be on that team. Think about it. How many 9-7 football teams have ended up winning a Super Bowl? The Baltimore Ravens, the New York Giants twice. 10-6. What was it? 9-7, the Green Bay Packers. Come on. That doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. Why is this a debate? Why is this a thing? I love Marcus Allen. Don't get me wrong. One of the greatest runs in all of Super Bowl history belongs to Marcus Allen. But for anybody to say that Terrell Davis doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame because his career got shortened and maybe all the numbers aren't there, why is this all stats? Look at Coach Howard Schnellenberger. He's one of the greatest coaches to ever coach the game of football, period. The guy has recruited more future Hall of Famers, more future head coaching Hall of Famers, more Heisman Trophy winners than anybody in the history of the game. But he spent a lot of time trying to make bad teams really good. Everywhere he went in college, he basically had to have a 4-year plan. You know, I interviewed Howard Schnellenberger one time, and he told me, he said, the dynasty that I started was greater than any dynasty in the history of sports. He could very well be correct about that. Think about it. From 1983 to 2002, who won more national titles than the Miami Hurricanes? Who? Who was better year after year than the Miami Hurricanes? Howard Schnellenberger's not in NCAA Football Hall of Fame simply because of a stat that is the winning percentage. Did you know that Howard Schnellenberger coached the youngest team to ever win a bowl game in the history of the NCAA? He single-handedly was the first coach at Florida Atlantic when they very first started their football team and immediately took that team from being a Division II football team to a Division I football team. And when their new head coach was recently hired, the first person that he met when he got on campus, Howard Schnellenberger, folks. And a guy like that's not in the Hall of Fame simply because of a stat. Why are we so obsessed with the numbers? I'll tell you why we're obsessed with the numbers. And I have said this several times over the last few years. The reason why people are obsessed with the numbers is one thing and one thing only. Fantasy leagues. It's point blank. Fantasy leagues are part of the destruction of sports. Matter of fact, there's an ESPN 30 for 30 on it, and I'll let you go ahead and go and watch it. The guy who created it said, you know, now I know how the guy who created the atom bomb feels. If that doesn't tell you something, then I don't know what does. And he wanted to prove that he knew more about baseball based off of statistical analytics. That was his entire deal. I can know more than you. Meanwhile, the guy who's created it has never finished better than 4th in any league he's ever been in, ever. Stats, numbers don't lie, but they don't always tell the whole story. Terrell Davis, had it not been for migraines and a couple of injuries, would have easily put up numbers that would probably be untouchable. Don't we say the same thing about Jim Brown, Barry Sanders, some of the other greats that have been in? So, if they just would have stuck around a little bit longer, they may have easily put up numbers that nobody would be able to touch in this day and age period. Terrell Davis is a perfect example of one of the late, great classic running backs. That system is all but gone. There are a few teams that have continued to carry it out, but for the most part, it doesn't exist anymore. You don't line up a fullback in the front of a running back. You don't run out of pro sets. You don't do it. Not even out of the pistol train formation anymore. It's usually a halfback and a tailback. Now they take tight ends and stick them behind the tackle out of the pistol formation. Use them as a threat for the run or the pass. Because it's there. What's he going to do? Is he going to block or is he going to go out for a pass? That's what they're looking at. You don't see that anymore. You're not going to, those are the formations you're looking at now. You're not going to see the classic, when was the last time a guy like a Mike Allstott did something in the NFL? A Robbie Conrad. In the classic sense of the running back, Terrell Davis was all of those things. I just don't understand where all this is coming from. Maybe because I'm a Broncos fan, there's a little bit of me being partial. It could be that. But it also could be that I look and see exactly what he did with that football team. And I think to myself, there's really no way in hell that this guy doesn't deserve to be in there because of how he affected the team, what he meant to that football team. How good were the Denver Broncos after John Elway and after Terrell Davis? I'll tell you how good they were. Before Peyton Manning got there and Denver was able to recruit all of these defensive players and John Elway came in and changed how everything was done in that organization, Denver had exactly 3 playoff wins from John Elway's retirement year all the way up in the year that they ended up getting blown out in the Super Bowl by the Seattle Seahawks. It just doesn't make sense that Terrell Davis wouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And you could almost look at it and say Denver Bronco players are being hated on. Look how long it took for Shannon Sharp. Look how long it took for Steve Atwater. The real reality of it is this. Terrell Davis belongs in the Hall of Fame, and it's not got to do anything with anything else other than how he affected that football team. It is a point-blank situation. If Corey Dillon thinks he belongs in the NFL Hall of Fame, then Corey Dillon needs to go and show us that the Cincinnati Bengals would not have been a team that was worth anything had it not been for him. A team that wouldn't have been worth anything had it not been for him when he was with the New England Patriots. Yes, during that Super Bowl season, he ran for 104 yards a game. During the playoffs, though, he had one big game, and that was it. He was non-existent, and he had same opportunities in the playoffs that he did during the regular season, folks. Look at Peyton Manning and how a lot of people think his career is defined. People believe that Peyton Manning's career is defined by the regular season, that he's the greatest, quote, regular season quarterback of all time. There's a lot of people that view him that way. I'm sick of all the numbers. They don't always tell the whole story. A guy like John Elway, his numbers don't tell the whole story. A guy like Brett Favre, who threw as many interceptions as he did, don't tell the whole story. I've seen that man run out and make blocks on linebackers. Brett Favre affected that football team. He was the MVP 3 years in a row for a reason. And that's a guy who started out as a backup in Atlanta, and he was a backup in Green Bay. I'm not saying Corey Dillon doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. But I'm not saying that he does. But I am saying that Terrell Davis damn sure does belong in the Hall of Fame, because without him and John Elway and that offensive line, that football team would not have been good enough to go to a Super Bowl.